Hi everyone, good evening. We'll wait a couple of minutes just to see if anyone else joins us this evening, but thank you for joining. Hi everyone, good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name's Catherine Howe and I'm the Area Manager in the Regeneration Investment and Jobs team. I'm joined this evening by Steve Barton, the Head of Planning Policy, and we're here to run through the Reg 19 local plan overview with you this evening. We will be recording this session, and the recording and the slides will be available uploaded on the website after this evening's session. Please do, as Steve runs through an overview of the plan and specifically for the Acton town plan this evening, please do add any questions that you might have into the chat. And if when we get to the Q&A towards the end of the session, you have anything further that you'd like to ask, then please do raise your hand and I'll be able to bring you in at that point. At this point, I'll hand over to Steve, if that's okay, and can get into the detail for us. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you very much for joining us this evening for our local plan webinar with an overview of Acton. I'm Steve Barton, I'm the Strategic Planning Manager for Ealing Council, and I lead the team responsible for preparing and producing the local plan. So the local plan is a key document for the council. It helps us shape future growth and development across the borough. It sets out a vision, strategic priorities and a planning policy framework for development in line with the council's corporate council plan. And what the plan seeks to do is to create confidence and certainty for communities, businesses and investors across our 7 towns about the nature and type of development that we are promoting, and provide confidence that, that those sorts of schemes are likely in principle to be acceptable. The plan must be prepared alongside requirements that are set out in national planning policy and by regional government, the Mayor of London, embodied in the London Plan. It covers a 15-year period up until 2039 and must be reviewed every 5 years. Now, a list of local plan highlights is always entirely subjective, but these just are some of my personal favourites. I think the most important thing in the plan is its focus on place shaping, place making, the regeneration of our town centres, and even the creation of some new ones. The approach to the 7 towns, different geographies that make up Ealing, is fostered around the belief that Ealing shouldn't be a dormitory suburb of central London. We want to obviously ensure that we can sustain and create jobs in our own borough, and that growth and investment should be spread more evenly, more balanced across the borough. There are a range of policies which seek to promote active travel and the concept of the 20-minute neighbourhood. There are policies which seek to support more generally affordable housing. And in particular, I would mention the raising of the fast track threshold for viability assessments in the London Plan from the current 35% to 40%, and the closure of effectively a loophole, which means that minor developments, i.e. schemes of less than 10 units, make no contributions at all towards affordable housing. There are also suites of policies which seek to protect and enhance the use of employment land, with policies in particular focusing on generating more affordable workspace. We take a robust approach to tall buildings, and we set out where tall buildings may be potentially suitable, and we set out broad metrics for sort of threshold ranges and their specific locations. There is in this iteration of the plan an entirely new suite of quite radical and ambitious climate action policies, including on whole life carbon. We also set out very clear design principles and infrastructure requirements for each of the 84 development sites or site allocations that have made it through to this final iteration of the plan. And sitting alongside the local plan are our proposals now published for a new community infrastructure levy, effectively a tax on future development, to help us pay for and fund the infrastructure required to support our planned growth. So in this presentation, I'm going to provide a bit more context and background to the local plan, then going to focus on town plans, and in particular, the town plan for Acton. I'll then say a little bit about development management policies, a little bit about community infrastructure levy, and I'll end with an explanation of how you can provide us with further feedback. So this slide illustrates the broad structure and format of the local plan, and the most important thing to remark is that the London plan is an integral part of our local development plan, and indeed our local plan must be in general conformity with the London plan. But it also means we don't therefore need to replicate or duplicate policies in the London plan. In fact, there are inherent dangers in so doing. So after two introductory chapters, which define the relationship between the local plan and the council plan and provide some contextual information about how we got to this stage, chapter 3 is really where the plan begins to get interesting, because we start to introduce planning policies. And that's the spatial strategy, the overarching borough-wide spatial vision and strategic objectives. Chapter 4 is the bulk of the plan, and that's where we set out our 7 individual town plans, how we translate that borough-wide strategy into strategies for each of the town centres, recognising their unique identities and the differing challenges and opportunities that each possesses. And then chapter 5 is a slightly slimmer chapter, which is our development management policies. These are the criteria-based policies used alongside the London plan to help determine individual planning applications. And then finally, sitting alongside the local plan is a policies map, and all that does is seek to illustrate on a map base the various planning policy designations that we cover. Now, I would urge you to have a look at 2 particular documents, which are both accessible from our landing page on the local plan. Again, responding to concerns that were raised at an earlier round of consultation, we've produced a wayfinding guide, so that if you're particularly interested in a particular theme or topic, it will help you navigate between policies in the London plan and in our local plan, so that you can read across more holistically and comprehensively. And in addition, we've produced 2 documents to help you understand some of the changes to planning policy designations, an atlas of change, but also an interactive policies map. And on that, you can plug in your address and you can find out what development sites are within close proximity and what changes to planning policy designations might be of interest or concern to you. So do have a look at those. So this slide illustrates the broad planning framework, and as I said, we must operate within policies that are set by government, embodied primarily in the National Planning Policy Framework and associated guidance. The London Plan, which I've already mentioned, and we must be in general conformity with the London Plan. And then sitting beneath the local plan are neighbourhood plans. We have 2 currently adopted in West and Central Ealing, and 2 others currently in the pipeline. Now, it's important to point out that the scope and coverage of the local plan does not extend to the full boundary of the London Borough of Ealing, and that is because of a mayoral development corporation which was set up for the northeast area of the borough, covering Old Oak and Park Royal, which is a separate local planning authority and has separate local plan making responsibilities. So we cannot set planning policy for North Acton and Park Royal. So I would refer you to their local plan. Although in our document, we talk about how we can collaborate with the OPDC to meet various shared objectives. This slide illustrates the stages in the preparation of a local plan, and we're currently at stage 5, the publication or Reg 19 stage, or as I prefer to call it, our final proposals. And before we got here, we started with our Shaping Ealing consultation, where we asked you what challenges there were in your local communities and what opportunities existed. What did you like about your local areas? What things would you like to see changed? And that was conducted alongside a large technical evidence gathering exercise, and all of that information was used to inform our Reg 18 local plan, or as I prefer to call them, our initial proposals, which we published for consultation from the end of November 2022 to February 2023 for 10 weeks. There was also a further mini round of consultation on one particular issue for 6 weeks in the summer. And those 2 rounds of consultation netted a very impressive 14,000 responses from the local community, from the public and from stakeholders. And thank you if you're one of those who provided valuable feedback. So on conclusion of the Reg 18 consultations, we gave very careful consideration to those representations, and we've made a number of very important changes to the plan. A lot of those are very helpfully summarised in the introductory chapter to the local plan, including a list which shows which site allocations have fell away and which site allocations have been added. So we're now, as I say, at stage 5, Reg 19, and this consultation round will last for 6 weeks and concludes at 6 p.m. on the 10th of April. And once this consultation is over, we will again give careful consideration to any representations that we receive, and then together with our prepared responses and the plan itself and the entire evidence base, we will then send that to the Secretary of State for independent examination. And he will appoint an independent planning inspector who will examine the plan against various tests of soundness and legal compliance, and will produce a report. That report, hopefully, will say that the local plan meets those tests, and if it does, it will then be open to full council to then adopt the local plan. Now, I envisage that we will get to the submission stage in the summer. I'm currently aiming for the end of June. Of course, that will depend on the volume of representations we receive and their scope. And once we submit, the timetable and the process is not run by me or the council, it's run by the inspector. So he or she will determine the issues and matters to be discussed and the timetable for any public hearings and who is called to give evidence at those public hearings. But my best guess is that we probably would get to those hearings towards the end of autumn at the earliest, more likely winter, possibly this side of Christmas or possibly into the new year. And then adoption, if all goes well and we get that report from the inspector confirming that we've met the various tests, adoption is expected to take place around the summer of next year, as I say, subject to the independent inspector's assessment. So this slide illustrates the connection between the local plan and the council's corporate plan, the council plan. And in the council plan, there are 3 overarching strategic objectives around climate action, around fighting inequality, around creating good jobs and growth. And they are very much the golden threads which run through the local plan. And sitting beneath each of those 3 objectives are 3 individual priorities. So you'll see an explanation of those in chapter 2, and you'll see in both chapters 3 and indeed chapter 4, the town plans, that those are referenced throughout. In chapter 3, as I say, this is when the plan begins to get interesting because we start to introduce planning policies, including an overarching vision for the borough. I'm not going to go through this slide in great detail, but the key objective is to ensure that we are able to see growth that's more balanced so that all of the 7 towns in Ealing can share in future growth and prosperity. And that's illustrated in a diagrammatic key diagram, and you'll see that the focus for much of the future growth and investment is either town centres or nodes of public transport, good public transport connectivity, either now or proposed in the future. And so many of the town centres are represented here with the addition of 2 new ones. We're proposing a new neighbourhood centre at the current White Hart roundabout in Northolt and in the environs of Perryvale Station. So turning then to chapter 4, each of the towns that make up Ealing have their own unique local identity, their own characteristics, and their own problems, challenges, but also opportunities. And as I said before, the aim of the plan is to try and ensure that they can all contribute and benefit from future growth and prosperity, so that growth can be more balanced across the borough. Each town plan is divided into 4 broad sections, some contextual information, a spatial portrait, if you like, setting out some of the key issues and opportunities, largely identified through the technical evidence base and through the feedback that you gave us through Shaping Ealing. There is then a town spatial strategy, which articulates how the borough-wide spatial vision and spatial strategy is translated into town-specific policy, guiding future investment and development. There are then a series of more town-specific spatial policies, which set out detailed policy relating to different parts of the town. And then finally, and most crucially, there is a set of site allocations or development sites. These are those specific locations that we believe will be critical to delivering the various objectives in the plan, particularly around delivering more homes, sustaining and creating jobs, and providing any necessary infrastructure. So turning then to Acton. Acton today is a diverse town with a population of nearly 68,000 people. It's contrasting levels of deprivation with some of the least and most deprived neighbourhoods nationally. Indeed, areas of South Acton and North Acton are amongst the 10 to 20% most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. Well, while conversely, Southfield's ward scores consistently as one of the least deprived wards in the borough. Acton, of course, is well connected and benefits from proximity to the strategic road network, and that includes the radial corridors of the A40 and the Uxbridge Road. However, the presence of those road corridors and indeed the historical rail network means that parts of Acton do suffer from high levels of severance at a local scale due to those routes traversing the area. Acton is home to many vibrant town centres and shopping parades, and these neighbourhoods and the neighbourhoods that surround those town centres are mostly comprised of fine-grained residential typologies. Acton is also the location for significant industrial activity and employment spaces, with locally significant industrial sites in both South Acton and the Vale, close to Acton's historic town centre. Acton is also home to a creative enterprise zone that aims to support artists and new creative businesses to find affordable workspace within the borough. And of course, a sizable part of the area of Acton is covered by the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, the OPDC. That includes North Acton and much of Park Royal and extends across the borough boundaries into Brent and Hammersmith. And the OPDC local plan aims to deliver across their patch almost 14,000 new homes to create over 36,000 jobs and over 250,000 square metres of extra industrial floor space over their plan period. And North Acton, of course, acts as a key gateway and a strategic transition area from the rest of Acton into the wider opportunity that OPDC is seeking to deliver in their local plan. So this is an opportunity, we believe, for all Acton residents and businesses to directly benefit from this, and Ealing Council will continue to help shape future plans and work collaboratively with the OPDC. So turning to some of the challenges and opportunities that Acton faces, Acton is the least affordable town in the borough when taking into consideration the incomes of local people and the cost of housing. This is largely the result of its location closer to central London, which drives up housing prices. There is increasing pressure on industrial conversion to residential. This risks compromising Acton's key role as an economic driver for the borough, and high demand for industrial workspace is impacting affordability and resulting in some sectors being pushed out. And the impact of this is already being seen within Acton, which has experienced stagnant and declining economic growth over the past 5 years, with the number of jobs in Acton declining by 13% over this period, primarily in the industrial, construction, transport, ICT, media and creative employment areas. Now, whilst Acton has many historically vibrant town centres, these areas have also been experiencing varying levels of decline with higher than average vacancy rates. This is a result, of course, of increased competition from online, but also from nearby shopping centres for footfall, including Ealing Broadway itself, White City Westfield and Shepherd's Bush. And Acton's smaller neighbourhood centres have a more limited retail offer, usually comprising convenience and fast food uses, and they have higher than average vacancy rates. As I've already said, the A40 and the Oxford Road are the main arterial routes within Acton, primarily focus on moving high volumes of traffic into and out of central London, and these cause local severance between neighbourhoods in the town. So there has been historically insufficient investment in active travel infrastructure for pedestrians and for cyclists, and it's led to some areas having poorer access to some of the existing amenities, including green space. But Acton benefits from a number of unique opportunities. Whilst it suffered from economic decline, particularly within the industrial sector, it still retains a strong industrial business base with specialisms, particularly in food, manufacturing, wholesale, transport and storage, and these provide opportunities for future growth. The evolving industrial and creative sectors with Acton also provide opportunities to explore the potential of co-location of light industrial and residential uses that could provide valuable economic activity, boost wages and provide homes closer to where people actually work. And while Acton's town centres are vibrant and provide a range of leisure, community and local services that are valued by residents, there is clearly scope and opportunity to build upon these assets to create more complete communities. And Acton has a mix of housing types that caters to the differing groups. However, there's an opportunity to provide a wider range of both housing types and tenures. So turning then to the spatial vision for Acton. Acton then is a diverse community with a thriving creative sector. There is a community-led ambition to champion Acton's cultural life, to build on this unique identity and to use culture as a catalyst to bring visitors to the town. Growth in the future will capitalise on Acton's strategic location, the Elizabeth Line connections to central London and Heathrow, Acton mainline station, and its proximity to the future high speed 2 station at Old Oak Common to maximise economic opportunities for the area. And so the delivery of moderate levels of development is possible along some of those key north-south corridors, particularly the West London orbital route, which we propose, with an emphasis on integrating development and encouraging growth based on local needs. So growth will be concentrated close to those transport interchanges, both existing and future ones, together with investment in sustainable connectivity between the various neighbourhood centres, while Acton's green routes seek to link open spaces locally with opportunity to connect and enhance natural corridors and biodiversity. The functional roles of the two town centres at Acton District Centre and East Acton Neighbourhood Centre will be enhanced through mixed-use development to increase their vitality and viability. Acton Gardens will capitalise on its proximity to Acton Town Station and will be a focus for a residential-led growth and regeneration. A new neighbourhood town centre, Acton Mainline Centre, serving in particular the nearby Friary Park estate, will be created as part of the wider regeneration of that area. And the vision also seeks to protect and indeed intensify industrial sites and their associated employment opportunities, alongside supporting increased activity within the town centres with help to improve and enhance Acton's local economy. And the council, as I've already said, will work collaboratively with the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation and indeed other key stakeholders to address some of the challenges caused by severance from the A40 and railway lines and to maximise potential opportunities that arise from the very significant development that's taking place around North Acton Station. So in terms of the spatial strategy for Acton, the creation of new active travel interventions that help to reinforce north-south connectivity whilst also improving the permeability of local neighbourhoods and supporting health and environmental outcomes is clearly a priority, as is promoting and enhancing Acton's parks, including better accessibility and the creation of improved green links to connect parks and open spaces. And noting that Juliet is one of the speakers today, we also include a proposal that came from the community to designate 3 small parcels of green space as local green space. The spatial strategy also seeks to create a circular economy hub at Stirling Road to help promote waste reduction and behaviour changes towards zero waste and reuse. There are policies which seek to enhance Acton's health and infrastructure, to support and enhance the strong industrial base and to address the specific housing needs of Acton residents by delivering more generally affordable housing to tackle deprivation and low incomes. And finally, the plan sets out the key infrastructure delivery priorities for Acton. And some of those key components are illustrated on a key diagram for Acton, a map. And then the town plan sets out a number of individual spatial policies for different parts of the town, and these seek to enhance Acton's role as a district centre, to actively manage the continuing transformation of South Acton, Acton Gardens, to create a new neighbourhood centre at Acton Mainline Station and environs, exploring also the potential for future mixed-use development on the siding site, to enhance the role and function of East Acton Neighbourhood Centre, and to work collaboratively with the OPDC. In terms of development sites, this iteration of the plan includes 8 development sites. That's 5 less than we consulted on at Reg 18. 3 of those development sites are considered to be potentially suitable for a tall building, of which all 3 are for 10 stories or more. And those development sites are illustrated on this map, and those where taller elements might be deemed to be suitable are also highlighted. So that was chapter 4. I wanted to say a few words about chapter 5, which, if you recall, is the development management policies, which alongside the London plan are those criteria-based policies, quite technical, which are used by planners to help determine individual planning application. And they take one of 2 forms. They are either local variations to existing London plan policies or entirely new policies based on our evidence base. And so they include policies on things like design and amenity, a robust approach to tall buildings, policies around promoting affordable housing and affordable workspace, and protecting and enhancing our industrial land portfolio, policies around open space, urban greening, and supporting biodiversity net gain, delivering more and enhanced sports and recreational facilities, our new suite of climate action policies, in particular around a whole life carbon approach, which includes optioneering and retrofit, and then how the plan is funded. So I also promised to say a few words about the community infrastructure levy. If you remember, this is effectively a sort of tariff or a tax on future development. And we're consulting on this at the same time as the local plan, and it's going to operate on exactly the same timetable. Now, the primary use of SIL is to get financial contributions from certain types of development to help fund new or improved strategic infrastructure required, necessary to support the planned growth that we've identified in the local plan. Now, it's very different from the existing system of Section 106 payments insofar as it's non-negotiable. So it therefore should create much greater certainty about what new development will contribute in terms of delivering the infrastructure that we need to support growth in a much more consistent, a much more transparent way than the current reliance on Section 106 agreements, which are subject to site-by-site negotiation and legal agreements. Now, Section 106 will remain and will continue to be used for site-specific mitigation and non-infrastructure requirements, notably affordable housing and things like employment and skills training. And we are the last local planning authority in London to seek to adopt a SIL charging schedule. And this slide illustrates some of the rates. As you'd expect, residential development attracts the highest values based on viability, and we set slightly higher rates for the central Ealing geography because of the values and viability evidence supporting a higher tariff within that geography. So if you want to get involved on the SIL consultation, go to our local plan landing page, and you'll find helpful links then to information about SIL, including the supporting evidence-based documents, which include the infrastructure delivery plan and delivery schedule, and local plan and SIL viability assessment. If you want to get involved on SIL or the local plan, the deadline, remember, is 6 p.m. on the 10th of April. So if you want to comment on the local plan, if you go again to the local plan landing page, you'll find that we've created a very helpful toolkit for you to help you understand and explain how you can respond to the draft local plan. And there are many ways in which you can provide us with feedback. Our preferred route is to complete the representation form. It's the easiest via SurveyMonkey. Alternatively, you can download the original representation form, complete that and send that back either via email or snail mail. You can email us or you can send us a letter. And you'll find hard copies of the representation form and indeed the local plan itself in all libraries across the borough and in the Customer Services Centre in Ealing, our council offices. So be pleased to know this is my final slide. So what happens next? So following the public and stakeholder consultation closing on the 10th of April, we will again give careful consideration to any representations that we receive before submitting those, our responses, the plan and the evidence base to the Secretary of State for examination. Examination is basically a glorified public inquiry. Now, I should suggest, I must say the council cannot make any changes itself to the plan, only the inspector can, but we can suggest modifications based on the responses we receive. If those modifications are deemed to be more than minor, the inspector may require us to undertake further rounds of public and stakeholder consultation. Now, the planning inspector's job is to assess the plan for legal compliance and also against various so-called tests of soundness, which are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. And again, helpfully, we've reproduced the 4 tests of soundness on our local plan landing page. And so the inspector will expect you to craft any responses around those tests. If you don't make a representation, then you won't have a chance to make further representations and be invited to the public hearings that will likely take place later in the year. Now, as indicated earlier, we plan to submit to the Secretary of State in the summer. I'm currently aiming to do so by the end of June. But of course, that timetable will be dependent on the volume of representations we receive and their scope. Thereafter, the timetable is set and managed entirely by the inspector, not me, not the council. And the inspector will determine those issues and matters that they want to consider during the examination process. And they will prepare an agenda for the formal public hearing stages, and they will determine whom is invited to those public hearing stages and whom can give further oral testimony. As I say, the timetable will be set by the inspector, not me, but my best guess is that we would expect to see the hearing dates start before the end of this calendar year, possibly as early as late autumn, more likely in the winter, and potentially straddling either side of the Christmas New Year holidays. And then, subject to the inspector's report, and assuming the inspector finds the local plan to be both sound and legally compliant, it will then fall to full council to decide whether or not the plan is adopted. And I expect that resolution to be considered hopefully in the summer of next year, as I say, subject to the inspector's report. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm more than happy to take questions. And I'll go back to Catherine, who probably will manage this process for me.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, please do add any questions that you have into the chat. And we've received one based on our session earlier. So we have a question from David Tennant, Steve, which is relating to a number of development sites within the Reg 19 local plan.
I think it's specifically about Dean Court, which colleagues, that's site allocation 07 AC, so it's adjacent to the large development at Friary Park. And what I gather from David is he's concerned that the site is firstly not deliverable. Well, I can immediately respond to that and say that it is, because if it wasn't considered to be deliverable, then it wouldn't have made the cut for Reg 19. Now, this is quite an unusual site because at Reg 18, we are required to undertake what is called a call for sites. In fact, we did an informal call for sites earlier on in the process. So this was one of 4 sites that were added post Reg 18 because they were suggested by landowners. And so the landowner in this case, which is actually a housing association, was keen to promote this site and put forward a very convincing case, which we've assessed in the same way that we've tested and assessed other sites that were considered. And so certainly on deliverability grounds, David, there's no issue, because we have a landowner who is keen for this site to come forward and is keen for that to happen during the 15-year span of the local plan. David then goes on to say, but there are a number of very important tests, particularly around air quality, around issues around biodiversity and tree preservation orders. And the concern is that together with the lack of accessibility to open green space undermines the validity of any future development proposals for that site. We have subjected this site allocation to independent assessment in terms of an integrated impact assessment, in terms of sustainability, and certainly there are some red flags in terms of some of the issues that will be of concern at the planning application stage should this site come forward. But normally one would expect the sort of detailed assessments on those sorts of issues to happen at the planning application stage, not at the local plan stage. What the local plan is seeking to do is to test whether or not, in principle, a principle of development in terms of the mix of uses, in this case it's primarily residential-led development, is appropriate, and to suggest some very broad high-level design parameters, principles if you like, which would help guide and shape any future development proposal. So the site allocation does that, so as well as discussing some of the contextual considerations, sets out both design considerations and infrastructure requirements likely arising from any future development proposal. Clearly, obviously, there is quite significant development in close proximity, and so in considering whether or not the scale, height and massing of any development on Dean Court would be appropriate, we subjected the site to design analysis as part of our tall buildings strategy, and in particular the site assessment, and you'll find that information in the updated evidence-based report that was published alongside the local plan on February the 28th. David also notes the issues around overcrowding on the Elizabeth line. I tend to agree that the Elizabeth line is, to a certain extent, a victim of its own success. It's added, remember, 10% to the overall capacity of train capacity in London, an absolutely massive infrastructure project. And clearly, obviously, there have been teething problems, particularly with signalling and so forth. But certainly, it shows that there was clear demand for that increased public transport connectivity. And of course, that should also be read in tandem with proposals for West London Orbital, which are also seeking to improve north-south connectivity, which is a new train line that the council and others are supporting, which would run from Hounslow via Old Oak Common up to Brent Cross. So there are ambitious proposals for improvements to rail infrastructure in West London. So I think that sort of covers the sort of gist of the main points. I don't know whether David is actually here, whether he wanted to come back on any of that. Perhaps you might want to digest that before so doing. Are there any other questions, Catherine?
Yes, thanks, Steve. Juliet has asked, can we ask why developers who provide retail space always offer large spaces, only affordable by chains, when there is a desperate need in Acton for smaller units that would suit a key cutter or shoe repairer, or a ceramicist, knife sharpener, etc. It seems that smaller spaces might help provide local jobs, and that she'd be interested in our view. Thanks.
I think that's a good question, actually. And I think obviously flexibility is the key. So clearly, cornerstone of the local plan and our strategy is around the concept of the 20-minute neighbourhood. And what that is essentially about is really two things. Firstly, can we improve active travel connectivity? So the conditions for those of us like me who are pedestrians or cyclists to be able to move around more easily, more safely between points of interest, but also so that we don't have to travel to further away to other centres. Can we have a broad range of goods and services available on our doorstep? And it's certainly something that we all rediscovered perhaps during the pandemic. So clearly, obviously, convenience shopping is obviously usually the top of most people's list, but I think you're right. Laundrettes, hairdressing, these basic goods and services, the more you can provide those at neighbourhood or local centre level, the better. And certainly there are plenty of examples, particularly in Ealing, where we have a very successful sort of polycentric approach in terms of local centres and shopping parades. And we want to try and strengthen the opportunities for diversification of town centres and shopping parades, so we do have a broader range of goods and services being offered. It's important to remember, though, the limitations of the planning system, because whilst obviously we can promote and encourage, we're not in the business of selling groceries or cutting people's hair. So clearly, obviously, the viability considerations of some of those local shopkeepers and businesses will be of paramount significance. But you're right, by setting affordable rents, that can attract and sustain businesses which can grow and flourish and provide essential services for local residents. So that's always in our thinking. I don't know, Catherine, whether you wanted to add anything on that.
No, I think you covered it, Steve. I think you're right. It's a case of what we can set by policy, and then it's also looking at how we can work with businesses and support smaller independent businesses within our town centres. And that's a variety of programmes that lie outside of the local plan. But a great topic to bring up. We have another question in the chat.
Yes, a really good question from Paul. Shall I go to that one? The question, if you can't read the chat, is about transport links, north-south connectivity, particularly getting to the Elizabeth line at Acton Main Line. Absolutely right. So if you go and look at the detail of the local plan, I've not gone into a lot of the specifics, but we're keen to promote obviously improved public transport connectivity, particularly buses, but we're also looking to improve public realm for pedestrians and infrastructure for cyclists, which also includes places where cycles can be stored, particularly in close proximity to the station. That's also in tandem with more ambitious proposals around the West London Orbital Railway, which doesn't go to Acton Main Line, but would travel on an axis from South Acton in the borough through Acton Central Station, and then getting up to Old Oak Common on the Elizabeth line, and then continuing further north. The plan is to Brent Cross ultimately. So that's a quite significant rail investment programme. And then there's a further question also from Paul, I think, about local green spaces. Are they to be protected? Sorry, I can't say the word. I've got a bit of a chest infection. Are they to be protected? And the Beaconsfield Gardens green space, how can we ensure that it will be protected in the future in some statutory manner? I'm not sure if that's, not quite sure exactly where that is now, whether it's one of our 3 local green space designations. But I mean, in general, all of our green spaces, if they are public open space or community open space, they are protected from development. And some of those particularly small, valuable ones I was hinting at earlier, particularly along Friary Park, for example, we've given added protection by designating those as local green spaces, and that was in response to very helpful suggestions that came from the local community. And local green spaces are almost akin to the protection that's offered to Greenbelt or Metropolitan Open Land. So Acton, clearly, obviously, there are deficiencies in terms of access to green space, so I think the strategy therefore has got to be twofold. One, can we protect and preserve and enhance what we've got? Very much so. And can we promote better green links so that people who are living in communities where there isn't a large parkland can more easily get to green and open spaces?
Thanks, Steve. Yes, Paul has just followed up to mention that the Beaconsfield Gardens open space is currently within a conservation area that's earmarked for change.
I'm not quite sure what the change is. I think we were reviewing some of the boundaries of the conservation area, but I don't think we were looking to develop any of the green spaces within the conservation area. But I mean, I have to say I've not been involved in a lot of the detail on that, but that's not my recollection or understanding. And certainly there are no development proposals in the local plan which are seeking to specifically bring forward any development proposals on that site I'm aware of.
Thanks, Steve. Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to add to the chat at all? And I noticed that David Tennant's joined us now as well, but I know that you've already covered his question, Steve, so I'd suggest we share the recording so that he can check in with the detail in your response from there. And does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to add? Or please do raise your hand if there's anything you'd like to mention. Thanks, Charlie. I've just seen one more. So, Steve, what weight does the impact of the development proposals on existing residents have in terms of overload on local services and infrastructure? So, looking at capacity implications that growth and development might have in the area. Thanks,
Yeah,
Charlie.
So that's a really good question. So that's the reason why we've done the work around the infrastructure delivery plan, and in the Acton town plan, and indeed all of the town plans, we set out our key infrastructure priorities for the area. So clearly, obviously, that seeks to identify those projects we want to bring forward, and indicate where we're able to funding sources for that. Of course, I think it's important to recognise that both the council and indeed other public sector agencies, notably health, but also transport infrastructure, have suffered from several years now of sustained lack of investment, and that's had an impact on the range and quality of some of the services that are being offered. We are very keen to ensure, as we did at Reg 18, that there is a conversation which involves local communities around local priorities. And whilst I'm not directly involved, I'm aware of some very exciting proposals that are emerging from the council, so do watch this space, around town forums, and in particular opportunities to express views on how future infrastructure priorities will be set. We've set out, as I say, some broad high-level key priorities in the local plan, but obviously the devil is always in the detail. So watch this space. I think that those are planned for rollout later in the year.
Great, thank you, Steve. We also have a question from Claire, which is to do with what weight do existing residents' views have on the height of buildings have within the borough?
I mean, clearly, obviously, if you don't support tall buildings, you'll probably be disappointed. But I mean, one of the hallmarks, and I highlighted it as one of the key things that the local plan has sought to do, is to bring forward a very robust approach in terms of the control of tall buildings across the borough. So as well as a policy which is mandated by the London plan, we now set out very clearly the broad geography and precise location of those development sites where tall buildings are deemed to be potentially suitable. And furthermore, we also set out a broad threshold range minimum to highest to govern scale, height and massing on those individual sites. So if you look at each of the individual site allocations, you'll find in the pro forma section, the first part of the site allocation, we provided a helpful summary to say whether or not the site is or is not potentially suitable for a tall building. If it is, under the design principles, which will be on the second part of the site allocation, we set out the broad parameters around scale, height and massing. And if you want further detail where that applies, have a look at the tall building strategy, quite robust detailed report that sits as part of the evidence base. If you come to the local plan landing page, click on evidence base, it's on that long list of reports that are there. So I would say, Claire, that we are very aware of the sensitivities around this issue. We have done some quite exhaustive and very detailed work around that. And there is a much more robust, much more refined policy in the local plan, which seeks to be very clear about where tall buildings may be potentially suitable.
Thanks, Steve. Paul has asked will the recording be shared to all? I can confirm it will. Yes, we'll be posting it up online on the council website after the session, and the slides will be available there too for you. So yeah, please do dip back in and have a listen or take a look. And Charlie has asked, sorry, will we hear about the infrastructure plans before the end of this consultation?
Yes, so at Reg 18, we didn't publish any detailed proposal on infrastructure because I felt that the technical evidence, important though it is, needs to also be considered alongside feedback from local communities in terms of priorities. So as part of the iteration of the local plan now, we've published a full and detailed infrastructure delivery plan and schedule. Again, it's part of that evidence-based document. It's a very comprehensive, very robust document. But to be helpful, in chapter 3, we provide a sort of list of the borough-wide priorities, and for each of the town plans, we set out the broad key infrastructure delivery priorities for each town. So you'll find that in Acton in table A1, which is on page 111. And that includes things like West London Orbital Railway, which I've mentioned, alongside the things you'd expect around education, special education needs, active travel, flood mitigation and so forth. So do have a look at that.
Thanks, Steve. We have one more from Juliet, which is in relation to SIL.
Yep.
And she asks, could SIL cover the paintings of railings around one of the greens at the Priory Park and other parks in the area? Or, for instance, cracked pavements, and I'm presuming public realm improvements associated with that. She mentions that she doesn't think that Section 106 covers this, so she wonders how we can get help with the maintenance of infrastructure within our neighbourhoods.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, I mean, actually that illustrates the advantages of SIL over Section 106. So 106 money can only be used to mitigate adverse impacts of a particular development site. So broadly, any planning obligation money is then spent within usually close geographical proximity to the individual development site. Now, community infrastructure levy, we're not subject to that restriction. So that tax on development, if you like, can be spent anywhere in the borough. You don't have that geographical constraint, if you like, in terms of, so if you were in Northolt, for example, where there's been very little development, you've not seen very much Section 106 money because there's not been an awful lot of development. So that, you know, that's a bit of a challenge, a bit of a problem for folks who live up in that corner of the borough. So yes, improvements to public realm, improvements to our local green spaces and their upkeep and maintenance are all potentially things that SIL money could be spent on. As I say, going back to my comment about the town forums, I think the intention will be very much to ensure that local communities can help shape and influence what those spending priorities would be. So, Julia, I would certainly urge you, particularly with your successful campaigning on the local green spaces, when those get off the ground, to pay particular interest and to get involved, because you'd be an absolute valuable asset to that process.
Great, thanks, Steve. Does anyone have any further questions that they'd like to ask this evening? I think we've covered all of the ones that have come in the chat and the Q&A. So thanks, thank you very much for those. Let me just check if we've got any others that I've missed. No. Is there anything else that anyone would like to ask?
Well, in that case, I think I'll wish everybody a very good evening. I want to go get my dinner, to be honest. Thank you again for your continuing interest in the local plan. I hope this has been helpful and useful. If you do have further questions that occur to you later, do drop us an email. Again, you've got all the contact details on our local plan landing page, and I'll endeavour to try and get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for your interest, and thank you, Catherine, for producing for us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for joining. Thanks.
Good night now.